Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Felix with AgBase and Crop, and we're the distributor for the WinTech Soil Sampler and the drones via Cardo Canada. And I'll make a very short introduction here. I hope to be able to see some of you afterwards in our booth. We have a limited time here, so I'm just going to start right away. My topic is to look at different equipment on how it is used, what we're using it for, where comes the value. So first I want to explain quickly a few questions on how my presentation is laid out. So I'm going through the presentation fairly quick. If you're interested for more details, contact me through the booth or contact me after. So some terms, I have a few. When I talk about GPS, I mean satellite navigation and sat-nav system. So there's two satellite systems, probably most used in North America, and that's the GPS and the GLONASS, which the GLONASS is the Russian satellite system. RTK, when I talk about RTK, is a correction technology enhanced for precision. As an example, we use a base station or VRS. When I talk about resolution, I'm talking about the resolution of the data, with other words, the pixelation as an example, in satellite or drone data. And the best way to explain it is in an example. You need 10 to 20 data points to visualize something, depending on how clear and what you see in it. So if you look at a satellite image with 5-meter resolution, then that would mean you can analyze or recognize something within 50 meters. Or with drone data, 5 centimeters in 5 meters with that you can recognize. So there are any other operation factors with resolution, but we don't want to go back into that or into the details. So the first data set that I want to talk about is the elevation maps, because I think that's a very important map to work with in precision farming. So what does the data represent? It represents accurate elevation. That could be done with a local base station for accuracy, satellite. You should get that information from what the data represents. Their accuracy can be dependent on the equipment you use and fluctuate based on the GPS reception that you have. So that information is going to be of value with drainage maps, soil sample locations, production maps, test plots, seed bed preparation, crop protection, etc. I think that's probably a fairly easy one to recognize fairly quick. Yield data. For me, the yield data is a lot of the combines today have yield monitors. And the yield data represents removal rate. It doesn't represent any potential, but the neat thing on the yield data is that it has a moisture and bushel weight behind it. So how can I make this data useful? The quality of the data is dependent on the calibration. And if your calibration is out, that probably would mean that the dry bushel would be out as well. So calibration of the combines have been made much easier today, and they're not as complicated anymore, but are very, very important. How can I best use the data? Since yield data represents removal rate, this data is great to make soil sample maps. The data has to be normalized to be able to compare from one year to the next. In more than one, if you use more than one combine, that's an important part as well at the end. soil sample data. And I think that's probably one of the data sets that I struggle with in a way most when the data is incorrect or is not collected properly. What does the data represent? How about we look at that first? It represents, when you take it, specific soil nutrient levels, characteristics. To get a good data set, it has to be repeatable. So consistent depth in a sample and the amount of soil that is collected is very, very important. Collect the right amount of cores that you don't have to throw anything from the sample away. As soon as you throw the soil away from the sample, what did you actually throw away? One sample location. So I got some images here where I got points, sample points. If you go through the field and just go as a composite sample, I still recommend to have just 1 point as a composite sample. So if you can go back to that one specific location and resample, you have repeatable data. This means you only have one sample in the field, but at least the data means something in the background. Collect enough soil, enough samples in the field. So you can compare some of those samples within the field to make sure that you're on the right track. That gives you a comparison in case one sample is out. The other thing too is you won't probably want to use the samples from 1 year to the next. So if you have the same sample location, GPS located, and all on one location, you can compare that data. Otherwise, you're sometimes get into different soil types 1 year and the next year into a little bit of another area. It's not comparable. So what is the value? In the crop remove, we look at crop removal over the years. So when you look at remove nutrients, what is the cost? Now, the cost of time difference between just have soil sample and good sample is the cost of that is very, very small. So in comparison to how much money you spend on the fertilizer, I would say that doing a good soil sample with all the nutrients possible would be a good investment. The sample information is used to analyze crop differences between crop needs and availability in the soil. It can be a good, if you use the same location, it can be a good indicator when you take a tissue sample. So you know what's in the soil, and if you look at what the tissue sample shows you, it'll give you a good reference point. In my fields, I don't do grid sampling, but I sample specific locations with complete analysis. The sample location for the tissue sample is then compared with that. I read a few weeks ago that as from a survey that came back that the farmers would like to have the data, the record keeping data automated as much as possible. As applied maps is probably an easy way to automate the record keeping because it's already in a digital format. But what's important with that is that you have all possible information behind it. So what's the weather data information behind it? As an example, when you go out spraying and you don't know what the wind was, that data set to me is incomplete. So winds, temperature, etc. Where is the data best used? All historical information, we're going to go through a little bit more of historical information as well, but all historical information helps us when we look at a data set, on a new data set, to decide what and how we can, what that data means. Space imagery, and the speaker was talking about that before. Space imagery, what does the data mean, first of all, or what does it represent? They're all, in general, they're all reflected maps or visual maps from a distance. So and at most, at this point, most of those data sets would be satellite imagery, drone imagery, and potentially applicators on the sprayer, etc. And they're all collecting the data in a similar way. And it's reflectance data that reflects light from the leaf. So it gives us a health indicator. To make most use out of the information, the most important part of this data is the ground truthing. Other information that helps is we collect on the ground. So that's the plus the equipment itself. So the sensor bandwidth, resolution, GPS accuracy is all part of that data set. So what satellite imagery potentially means and is used for might not be the perfect solution for all of it. That's where the drone data can come in and help to fill some of those gaps. Having said that, drone data, you probably don't collect once a week. You're going to use that, you're going to collect that when you need high resolution information. I don't want to go totally into each equipment or each data set between drone, satellite, and ground collected data, but each data set has its own advantages and areas where it probably lacks in information. So I would be careful with how I'm using that. Real-time N application. There I used N application, but there is more ground sensors like this on the market to be used. The sensor in the image is just an example of spatial data. Again, it very much depends on what data or what sensor you're actually using. Is it NIR? Is it NIR red edge? Is it a mix? If you don't know what the data exactly means or what it collects, you might not be able to get a full picture of what the data can bring you. Right away, with most of those data, or all of those data has to be calibrated, and most of that data, type of data, would be calibrated with field walking, except the application on a sprayer like this. With this one, we're using greenery strips and so on. So what's important with this data is that it is calibrated based on field, crop, and the end strip calibration. Where is it used? The advantage of this is that you can, as you collect the data, you can apply right away. So there's other sensors out there, as an example, that detects weed. And when the first machine came out to apply nitrogen at a variable rate, there was also an equipment coming out that detected seed. It just was kind of left a little bit behind and not used at the time. What is an EC? What is EC data? So EC is electronic conductivity. It is measured of how much electrical currents goes through the soil or travels through the soil. It is an effective way to map soil texture because smaller soil particles, such as clay, conduct more current than large silt and sand particles. Since coarser particles hold less water, finer particles hold more water. Simple explanation is measures water holding capacity, and at the higher end reading, it measures salinity. So how or what is important with the data when we collect it? Follow all the calibrations, set up recommendations for from the manufacturers. Don't travel too fast. Because the sensor in a way measures water and the amount of water is relevant, you must map a field with the same day. So you can't have a rain in between, or you have to restart the whole field. While the field doesn't need to be highly saturated, but it does need water. So a too wet of a field or too dry of a field will not give you accurate data back. The data from a field is not directly compatible to the next field. So it can be calibrated with soil samples again to make sure that you understand that data. Where is the value in that data? In conjunction with elevation data, it can help you to make zones. Water holding capacity is one of the managers, is one of the limiting factors in managing that farm. It is a great way to detect salinity in the field. The field only needs ESM mapping once, unless you start to move soil or have practice in use a practice to extremely could change the soil in tillage, etc., or with tillage. What is the gamma radiation? What is gamma radiation? Natural emitted from radiation from soil, and the data is afterwards with algorithms extracted to data that we're going to use. What is important with the data? There is 3 to 4 channels depending what equipment that you're using. It is not dependent on moisture, and it is not dependent if there is a crop growing. The resolution is based on the width of the pass taken collecting the data. So if it is a 50-foot or a 30-foot, that really makes up for the data resolution afterwards. So the soil sample with this is very important. Where can we use this data best afterwards? And how can we get value out of this data? The soil sample calibrated data is behind that. So it will give us maps across the field based on this information with a calculation of the algorithm. So recognize the limitation of the nutrients because they're calculated across the field. So it's not like a grid sample that you're taking a lot of samples across the field. On the other hand, it's a continuous map across the field with being calibrated with this data. So where is this all leading when we look at all this data? The Roomba vacuum and the Thomas lawnmower and drones are probably the start of where this was kind of tested. So the fundamentals like yield maps, soil maps, and tested data is the most important part to start with. You want to make sure that you start with data that you know what the data means. The yield map is a great set of data, so collect it, but it's only good when it's calibrated like any other data. When you start with Precision Ag, make sure you have a goal and start small. Be committed to learn and adapt. Accept their environment. Not every year is the same, and it won't be for in the future. So any data is good as long as you understand what the data means behind it. And really, the important part with all the data is making notes. So when you soil sample and you drive through the field, keep notes. Make sure that you mark all those weedy spots. That's just an example of it. There is no perfect technology or all-in-one solution. There is also no solution that can turn on like a light switch. The operator is part of it and how the system will work. Ask yourself the 5W questions. How will it help me? The answer is not necessarily how much data you have. It's how much useful data you have. Make sure the data you collect is collected properly and you have notes and information with it to help understand the data. That's basically my short presentation. The interest of what we're doing is, from a Wintex, from a soil samplings perspective, we're using equipment to soil samples. So we sell that equipment and the drones. But at the end of the day, all that equipment isn't going to help us a whole lot if we're not doing a good job with it. Just having a good idea isn't good enough when you start with precision farming. Are there any questions?
If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the little chat box on the right-hand side, and we'll get Felix to answer them. And if you are a little nervous to ask them openly here, Felix is available at his booth or for private chat afterwards. But
thank you very much. If you tuned in, and as I say, I have a booth. Please visit us at the booth afterwards, and you have a great evening.
All right. Thank you, Felix.
Thanks.